Tonight I'd like to talk about intentionally designed culture. Right? When we say intentionally designed culture, we're talking about a repeatable, defined, and eminently implementable process for making change in organization. And when we talk about change, we want to talk about the difference between actions and behaviors. So we'll go into that in a little bit. We want to lead off here. When we talk about the future, when we talk about change, this is sort of the picture we tend to paint. Right? Everything's wonderful. We talk about the benefit. We're really talking about things that are useful and beneficial to people. Right? We try to put it together. We try to say, look how great this will be. And at the end of the day, what we find is that the future citizens of that envisioned utopia, instead of chasing the vision, often wind up chasing the visionary. Right? If you've ever tried to implement a change, you may have sometimes felt like the other person on the other end of this. A little bit, right? People will tell you no right away. A couple of people are laughing and chuckling, right? Like, oh yeah, we've had that. Okay, so in order to get through change, one of the things that we discovered is that there are three basic phases of acceptance. So at this point, we're beginning to talk a little bit about some of the underlying concepts. And one of the things that we know in the three phases of acceptance is that you always go through them when faced with a change. And the first one is always just say no. Right? It is a normal and natural and predictable response for people to look at a change, to be asked to make a change, to give a response that simply says, no, not going to do that. Now, the way in which they deliver that no tells us a lot about where that person is and how long it will take them to fully accept that change. But we always get a no first. And so our motto has become, when they tell you no, you've won. And it's really that simple, because someone who will tell you no cares enough about it to engage. And if they will engage with you, we're going to show you a methodology that I believe will help you guarantee the results of getting them through these three phases of acceptance and as quickly as possible. Now, when you've worked with someone, when you're working to get them to understand the idea, when they're beginning to assimilate it a little bit, they'll get to the point where they'll say, okay, let's try it. You may have heard this. Go ahead, we'll give it a try, but keep me in the loop. Give me frequent status updates, that sort of thing. What they've just done is they've given you their veto. They say, we can try it, but I'm going to hold onto the reins pretty tight here. I'm not sure exactly just yet that this is going to work out. And so getting someone to veto is actually a lot of progress. Getting someone to give you that conditional approval means that they're willing to try it. And assuming that benefit is really there, then you're going to quickly get them all the way through the three phases of acceptance. Now, the last one is a significant change in behavior. At the third phase of acceptance, when someone is fully on board, we notice that they begin to work for the benefit of others rather than looking entirely for their own benefit out of the change. And so we call this phase, let's go. And so the three phases of acceptance then are just say no, veto, and let's go. And the time that it takes a person or an organization or a society to move through those phases is the time that it will take us to effect a sustainable change. Until we've gone through all three of them, the change isn't fully assimilated, and you can't count on it staying for very long. Change can change back. We can fall back into old behaviors. And so to avoid that, we want to make sure that we've fully ensconced people in the let's go phase of acceptance. The secret to getting people through those three phases, really, the idea is we call it Pete, and repeat. It's repetition. Right? So I'm going to take a little time on this slide and talk about some of the more fundamental aspects of intentionally designed culture. The human mind is a forward-chaining, back-propagating network. If you knew exactly what that meant when I said it, would you raise your hand? Thank you. Okay. Well, Alicia, would you care to share? So a forward-chaining, back-propagating network, if you've ever seen a child, right, a 2-year-old especially, right, standing by the coffee table looking at the vase sitting there, and they go and they reach towards it and they stop and they look to see who's looking at them, right? You've seen the forward-chaining, back-propagating network in action, right? The idea is we take some action or plan to take some action, and then we look to see what the results are, whether we can predict what the results will be or what those actual results are. Another example is a small infant lying on a blanket. Before a baby can crawl, things like that. If they're playing on the blanket, anyone care to offer? What do? Right? They're just lying there. They tend to flail around a little bit. Right? Arms and legs move and all. They're just as happy as they can be until they poke themselves in the eye. Right? Well, what's just happened is forward chaining action has taken place. Oh, let's try this. Let's move my arm here. Let's move it there until they poke themselves in the eye and go, oh, that hurt. All right, well, I don't want to do that anymore. And so the human mind reprograms itself, and it inhibits that particular movement. So that today, we're really good at not poking ourselves in the eye. We've had years and years of practice at doing that. Now, moving beyond just learning not to hurt ourselves or poke ourselves in the eye, as adults, as people working in the workforce with a very complex set of decisions and judgments we have to make on a day-to-day basis, the mechanism keeps working. That's the way people learn. Now, I want to make a couple of comments about neural networks. Neural networks are notoriously good at figuring out how to reach a goal with different inputs and different things. And that means people are good at achieving a goal in a varying condition, in varying places. Now, when we write neural networks in software, sometimes they go astray. Back in the 80s, the U.S. Army decided it was going to write a smart missile using a neural network. And so they took pictures of U.S. tanks and Soviet tanks. And they showed the pictures to the missiles and said, only attack the Soviet tanks, don't attack the U.S. tanks. And so they trained and trained and trained and trained and trained the neural network, and they put it on the battlefield, and it attacked everything at night and nothing during the day. And the reason for that was that, well, the pictures of Soviet tanks were taken by spies in low light conditions. And so it learned, oh, attack everything when it's dark, and don't attack anything when it's bright. You know, that's what neural networks are good at. All right, and that's what people are good at. We're great at picking out those patterns and things like that. So when we talk about a forward-chaining, back-propagating network, we'll take a set of actions and we will wait to see what the result is. And if the result was beneficial to us, then we will disinhibit that action to make it more likely that we'll do it again in that same context. And this all comes down to the fact we say practice makes perfect. The more often we disinhibit that behavior, the more likely we are to do it, and the better we are to do it, the less resistance that signal will have. And so we say repetition strengthens the signal of an idea for a given context, and that disinhibits its action. So if there's something you want someone to learn how to do, right, and they perform that work, and they get a positive result back. Now this doesn't, I'm not saying go around to everyone and say, oh, that was wonderful, thank you for doing that, right? What we're talking about is they make a judgment themselves whether that was something they want to repeat. And if they want to repeat it, then they'll find that they'll repeat that action more frequently. So when we disinhibit action, that sounds a little weird to say disinhibit something, right? Okay, so we inhibit stuff, right? We inhibit things all the time. Oh, don't want to do that. I burned my finger. I'm not going to do that again. And it doesn't take long. A few times of reaching for the stove eye, you learn. Anybody ever reached for a hot iron and pulled back at the last minute? All right, those sort of things. So those are good disinhibited behavior or inhibited behaviors. Neural network terminology uses disinhibiting instead of make it happen again. Right, so it's just a technical term. So we disinhibit, meaning the opposite of inhibit. And that means we want it to happen. So we won't spend too much time on that other than to say it's a weird term, but it means when we say disinhibit, we mean do that again. It's just that simple. Now, it's a biological system. Neural networks are, especially the human mind. And just like we have an average temperature of 98.6 degrees, most people here, right? Right? We also say that there's a biological average for the rate of change. Right? We call those phases of change retention, belief, and assimilation, and the frequency of repetition necessary to take somebody all the way through those phases where they've gone from just say no, then they begin to retain the idea, they get to veto, they begin to believe it, and then they get to let's go, and they fully assimilated it, turns out to be a pretty predictable average. You know, I'm sorry to disillusion anyone, we're not that unique necessarily. Right? If we all have the same body temperature roughly, then we all have pretty much the same time rate of change, or the same number of repetitions necessary for us to fully assimilate an idea. Here's some numbers. What we've done through study and experimentation, we've found out that in order to get someone to remember what you said, you have to repeat it to them 16 times. So I'll say it again. In order to get someone to remember what you've said, you have to repeat it 16 times. I'm not going to say it 16 times. But the simple fact is, how many times have you come up to someone and you told them something, and it's as if it's the first time they've heard it? Right? But you know you just told them yesterday. Right? Husbands do that a lot, I know sometimes. Right? I didn't know we were doing that. All right? We've learned it takes 16 repetitions, and they'll remember that you told them that. Right? So if you're wondering why they don't remember it, and you say, well, okay, I've only told them 14 times, no wonder. Okay? We have to lower our expectations a little bit sometimes here.